Okay, so we're doing post-secondary transition. Sorry, I'm in and out. Jamie was talking a lot about executive functions and other things. I'm going to touch a little on that, but I'm going to be focusing on post-secondary transition through this and just kind of summarizing a lot of the different handouts from the LDA conference. I've shared that Dropbox with you by now, so feel free to peruse through it. I organized it as best I could. A lot of stuff kind of overlaps. All right, so the first thing was life skills. Um, and some of this applies to us, some of this applies to their parents. So looking at things like, can they maintain a living space? Things we can do for that is making sure they're kind of leaving our classroom in order and not just a total wreck, putting desks back if they've moved them, putting books back if they're using stuff in our room, things like that. The personal hygiene. I know sometimes we deal with kids who have issues not smelling, to say it tactfully, or things like that, or they're doing weird things in front of everyone where you're like, I'm not totally sure what to say, but sometimes I'm grossed out. And if you're probably better at this than I am, I tend to have to ask Tammy how to be tactful in a moment like that because my instinct is not a tactful one. So yeah, dealing with that. Safety, that's probably a little bit more on the parents, but we do sometimes hear them discussing behaviors that we know are not safe. So just kind of reinforcing you're not actually as invincible as you think you are. So, bear that in mind. Health and wellness, we do have classes on that. We do have a school nurse, learning how to frequent that for an appropriate reason. Money management, and my bad, I did not spell that correctly. I'm only an English teacher. I should know that. So it's a good thing we've got the financial planning class for them. Uh, but even sometimes reinforcing if they're, if they bring it up in an appropriate way or something like that. Food prep, that's at home. But let's hope they can cook. Even ramen noodles, right? Social skills. So this is more of stuff we're dealing with probably, like the roommate conflicts. I know they're plus, and they are together all day, pretty much. Maybe less so by the time like I have them as their seniors, but certainly when they're freshmen and sophomores, they are together a lot. And there's all that drama that comes out of it, and helping them learn how to kind of navigate it appropriately, not bringing the rest of their classmates into it, not bringing other friends into it, but identifying what like the root causes are, and sometimes just learning that you're not always going to like everybody you have to deal with, and how do you handle it if you do have to do that. We didn't, I didn't always have a great roommate, and you figure it out. Learning how to talk to RAs or their landlords in appropriate manners, understanding that sometimes what you view as an immediate need, they're going to push down on the list for, a day, a week, a couple weeks. So bearing that in mind and not, throwing a hissy fit over it. Learning how to talk to their professors and tutors, not being afraid of them, understanding that if you're going to need help from them or help in their classes from them, you have to be able to talk to them. And joining clubs, different types of clubs, things like that, getting exposed to various viewpoints can be helpful, even if it's just for a little bit. And then finding study groups in college, because that's going to be really helpful for them as a resource, keeping them on track, helping them be successful. They've got time management, procrastination. We know our kids. We know this is a huge issue. I mean, how many of us have them show up, especially in first quarter, without doing anything and wondering how far they can push it? And so when you sit in there and you plug in the zero and mom and dad freak out and you're like, well, they didn't do it and that's the policy. They eventually hopefully learn sometimes. So ways to avoid it are to-do list. If they use a calendar, if they use a planner, whatever it takes. I live by Post-it notes, and I love my Post-it notes. Uh, but it helps. It gets me through the day. I know what I have to do. There's also apps, and of course there are apps for this. I was kind of surprised. I have no idea why there are apps for just about everything under the sun. But the ones they were recommending were Clear, Rescue Time, and Timely. I have not personally looked into them. But there's a lot of descriptions on one of the PDFs about the differences between the three. They overlap, but there are a few things that they handle differently. So having the kids understand that and what works best for them is always good. And then rewarding things with rewarding little small steps. I mean, I can't be the only one who decides like that you get your second cup of coffee after you graded this week's vocab quizzes. Things like that, whatever it takes, or that you get to watch the next episode of whatever you're binging on Netflix after you finish this round of essays. And they're going to be dealing with long-term goals and projects a bit more so in college. I know a lot of us are starting to engage project-based learning or longer projects. Some people I think have got stuff that actually goes over an entire semester, and props to you for that because 1 quarter is about all I can deal with for a really long project. But through that, we're helping them learn how to chunk things into manageable pieces, looking into things like backwards planning. I did that with mine for the Plus Seniors for Genius Hour and the Plus Juniors for their project-based learning, made them kind of make plans from the get-go for the end and then back. So that's a good thing. It's what I have to do to kind of figure out what's going on in my life as well and what I'm doing in my classes. Using a large calendar or a desk calendar. If it's really huge and visible, hopefully you remember what's going on and what you need to do. Color coding their classes or their social activities. I do this on my desk calendar, and yes, I've got like 10 or 11 colors, and I don't care. I know what they all mean, and I know what's going on for the most part. And then checking in with a trusted classmate. So if they've got someone who's pretty successful, pretty good at managing these things, kind of checking in with them like, this is what I'm doing. Is that similar to what you're doing? Or is there something else I need to be doing? All right, some of the challenges of this, especially in college, their supports are decreasing. They aren't necessarily going to have a plus program where they're going. There's more stuff out there for LD, but it's not legally required at a lot of these colleges that they do a lot in terms of accommodations, so that's a big change. Fortunately, our kids have been going to college prep stuff, so hopefully they're a little more prepared for things, especially because expectations are increasing. They're hopefully faring well. We've been trying to kind of increase what they're doing academically every year. We're still making accommodations. Maybe they can get some of them, maybe they can't. They're going to have to check in with the offices there. But there's also a time where mom and dad can no longer intercede because legally they're 18 and the parents don't get to do that anymore. They can't actually like tell the college this is what they need to do and all that. The kids have to be the ones advocating for that. They're dealing with a lot more distractions. They've got this freedom that they haven't really had before. They don't have to answer to mom and dad, especially if they're living on college campuses. And that can be overwhelming for a lot of people. I know 3 people who had to go back home and go to school from home because they couldn't maintain a decent GPA after that first semester. And they weren't people who had LD. One of them was a kid who took honor and AP classes. Like, it can happen to anybody, and I try to remind my kids of that. There's these endless options. There's so many different things you can go do and see and learn and experience. And then there's all these social opportunities. I mean, you could be going to a party, a mixer, a movie at any hour of the day or night all of a sudden. So that can make it really hard to deal with that time management stuff we were talking about. It helps that procrastination a lot. And then there's that self-doubt. These changes we're talking about increases their awareness of their struggles, of their differences, and of what makes it hard for them. So they're not doing as well. They sit there and they go, yeah, I knew college was going to be hard. I knew I wasn't going to do well. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, which we know they just need to be managing their time better, looking into their resources better, things like that. All right, so executive functions, and I know Jamie talked more about this with anxiety too. So bear with me if I'm repeating stuff she said. And some of this also came from like Dr. Marcia Tate things too. So just remembering that. So the brain development, we already know their frontal lobe's not fully developed. What I learned from these was that there's actually a 3-year delay for kids with LD past kind of the normal ones. So if she's saying like what was it, 25 or something was when they were ready, or was it like 22? Anyway, so add 3 years to that. Somebody who remembers can say that. So the brain inhibitions, they're likelier to kind of engage in risky behavior. They have that lack of insight and self-awareness. So finding ways to kind of get in touch with that, trying to increase that. They want that immediate gratification. They can't wait for the delayed reward. That's really hard. They want stimulation and novelty. So some of these lecture classes or kind of office work is going to seem really boring to them and make it easier for them to want to be distracted. But life is boring. I just finished my taxes. It was super boring, but I got through it because I have to, do my taxes every year. So kind of remembering that, yeah, everything's not going to be a three-ring circus to keep your attention, but you have to find ways to manage and get the job done anyhow. And there's a lot of people learning from their mistakes at this age, which might explain why we are sometimes really frustrated when it's like, how do you keep making the same mistake over and over in my class? Why don't you understand that you need to do this if you don't want to suffer that kind of consequence? So they're having even bigger struggle than most of our kids. The need for that self-advocacy, learning how to respectfully ask for accommodations and help, big thing. Not having to go in and demand it, but finding ways to say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm in your class, this is my struggle, this is what I've done in the past for that. What am I able to do in your class to help with that? Self-awareness, identifying strengths and weaknesses, limits and areas where they need to grow. Some of that goes back into this. We're going to have to work with them more on that because they've got that delay. And their self-determination, they need to be motivated from within for their own self, not for others. So finding the reason it matters to them, and sometimes even if it's just that you need to pass that class because you want to get that degree. I took biology for non-majors for that exact reason. I am not huge on the science. Sorry, science people. It's cool-ish, a lot of pretty images, and if it weren't for the pretty images, I probably would have played like on Facebook or something. So finding the other motivations. Support systems. So obviously their family's still going to support them. It's not like their family's going to abandon them this time. But they can't, their role has changed and is limited in a different way. So kind of finding the emotional support probably more so through there, and the modeling of this is what we did when you were in high school. This is how you're going to try to do that in college, and this is where you're going to bump into some different areas. Professionals, so not just their professors and tutors, but also the people on campus who are there to specifically help with kids with LD, finding those people and identifying that. Some organizations in different areas are around to help with LD. That's going to really depend on where they are. The school, has different resource centers, mentors and grad students to help with tutoring and study skills. And then their friends. So we know they know all the other plus kids in the other grades. So learning from the ones who've already graduated and gone through it, it's good. We've got that newsletter and stuff that Tammy's doing to help with that. All right, outside of college, didn't know what else to title this. So there's the gap year. Some people kind of need it to figure out their academic or career path. It's good as long as it's productive or restorative. This is when some people are taking the little community college class here and there, or people who've kind of hit that mental snafu are learning new emotional coping skills to help them for the rest of their lives. Also looking at career help once they're, whether they're not going to college for whatever reason, or when they're graduating college. So utilizing a career services office, joining clubs, organizations, student government, volunteering, being aware of their digital presence, kind of cleaning that up a little, remembering that potential employers are looking at all of this, and if you're constantly on the verge of a mental breakdown, they may not want to hire you if that's how it sounds every other status update. Getting to know their professors, charter school, they're going to need to do that. Learning how to network, looking into internships, practicing small talk. You've got to find a way to do that, and you've got to find a way to know what you can and cannot talk about with your boss. They don't necessarily need to know all the things our kids seem to think we need to know. Yeah. And then looking for jobs that match their strengths, abilities, and uniqueness. There's like a half of a PowerPoint, or maybe even 2 PowerPoints on the files that go all into different things that match kids with different types of LDs. All right, readiness checklist. So looking at proposal and contracts to help them be aware of what they need to be doing, how they need to be progressing, discussing their strengths and weaknesses in terms of college and career readiness. It's how I get them to kind of stop complaining about writing-ish. Is reminding them that you're going to need to be able to communicate even if you're not going to go into the humanities in college. They still expect you to be able to write a decent email, communicate what you're doing, make people understand what you're saying and learning, and your bosses will expect it of you too. Also looking at emotional coping. We have kids who stress a lot. kind of looking at it, what will actually matter in 5 years is a pretty good strategy for it. I know it helps me with that, um, being reminded of that sometimes. And again, working on intrinsic motivation and perseverance, the idea that they need to have their own reason to want to do it and to want to stick with it even when it's hard. And again, self advocacy, awareness, and determination, seeking out people and resources who can help them achieve all of these, whether it's through the school, outside organizations, through family and friends and mentors, what have you. Here's a pretty good sample checklist. I just liked it. A woman from a college had it up in one of her talks. So, kind of looking at cognitive and non cognitive factors that are really helpful and needed to get through, and then interference factors where if you've got too many of these going on, you might need something like a gap year to help you cope with that to get you on track for college or career. All right, and then resources, some good websites, and then just a reminder to look at the PDFs from the LDA conference. All right, hope you enjoyed it.